Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the pilot episode of the Planet Earth What's Happening podcast. I am your host, Brian Mooney. I was sitting here taking some notes before recording this podcast and just trying to gather my thoughts and get it together because I'm a little giddy and kind of nervous actually to be doing this, but I'm going to have some fun with it. And while I was jotting down these notes, I came up with a new slogan for the podcast, and it's Controlled Chaos for the Free Thinker. And I thought that was a pretty good slogan for the podcast. I didn't know I was going to come up with a slogan, but as I watched myself write these notes down and look through them right now, I see that I have the handwriting of a 6-year-old. So I came up with that little slogan based off of that. So I hope you guys like that one. Let's just get right into it. I actually did get a sponsor before I recorded this pilot episode. The sponsor is Catherine Nicole Custom Fragrance Collection. If you ladies come home from a cold winter's day, it's getting fucking cold out there, and you want to come home and unwind and draw yourself a hot bath and turn the lights off and light yourself a candle, think of Catherine Nicole Custom Fragrance Collection. If you go to CatherineNicoleCFC.com and use the promo code at checkout, PEWH10, you will receive a 10% discount on all your smell good items. I hope that promotion was pretty good. I hope Catherine Nicole likes that. Again, I'm still working on obtaining more sponsorships, but I think that's a pretty good start for now. Now, the reasons for me wanting to start this podcast, I have plenty of reasons. I really like to keep myself challenged, and challenged by me, I meaning not like mentally challenged, but I mean physically challenged and intellectually challenged as well. In the last 4 to 5 years, I've gotten my life straightened out, and I came to a point in life where I needed to fill some voids, and I started really picking up and playing sports and trying to do all the things I thought I could do still as a teenager, but I realized I couldn't do it anymore. I grew up playing soccer. I wrestled. I played basketball and played all the sports that I loved, but I got myself to a certain age where I couldn't do it anymore. I was a really big soccer player in high school. I've had a lot of colleges looking at me to come play. I tried out for the Philadelphia Union when I was 23. Got invited to their minor league camp, but ended up having some pretty bad muscle aches, and I had a back injury at work, so that kind of fell through for me. So I had to find other means of challenging myself physically. So I started to play flag football a few years ago. That was fun. I had a good time doing that, even though it was a cesspool of different guys. It was a combination of guys I went to high school with that played football and soccer, and we just went out there and try to run whatever play that we could play and stay as organized as we could stay. But it was fun nonetheless. I played with some old soccer buddies there. It was a very good time. Even that wasn't enough for me. Last year, I actually decided to challenge myself physically. I had to almost step my game up a little bit. I was listening to a couple podcasts of guys that talked about doing triathlons, and I really, really wanted to get myself into doing a triathlon. So I got myself, I borrowed myself a little amateur street bike. I started to swim. I was pretty good at running. I knew that just from working out, from playing soccer and other sports, and I'm a pretty good avid runner. I like to stay in shape. So I signed myself up last year for the Bethany Beach Triathlon. I went and did it, and I really enjoyed it. I got myself through it without passing out or cramping up or stopping to throw up, and I was pretty proud of myself. I placed 12th out of 35 people in my age group, which isn't too bad for my amateur training leading up to that point. I gave myself about 6 months to train. I did the best that I could while trying to work full time and be a full time parent as well. And I got myself through that. Now that I've gotten through that tangent, it was time to challenge myself intellectually. And I believe this podcast is going to do that for me. I really had to do some research on how to get this thing started. I was pretty nervous and pretty challenging for me to do it. I had to research all the right material that I needed. I had to look up some hardware, the software. I had to look up hosting sites and had to obtain a soundboard hosting software. And it was pretty intimidating at first. I didn't realize all that went into doing this. And I had talked to a few people that actually knew about getting this stuff started. And I just was like, you know what, I'm going to do it. I keep talking about it. I like talking with people. And I kept making jokes to people at work and in my life that I was going to do this. And I decided to do it. I said, it's time to stop being a little baby and go ahead and do this. I really enjoy talking with people and interviewing people. I like to educate myself, and I've sort of like to educate myself in an old-fashioned way. I read a lot of books. I try to surround myself people who can challenge me intellectually, and I can obtain information from them that I don't have a full understanding for. I plan on actually having a lot of people on this podcast who can entertain you guys with subjects, that you could be educated on, and I can educate myself on as well. I will talk about things on this podcast like sports, science, history, politics, engineering, technology, space. I'm sort of a nerd in that capacity. I like mixed martial arts. I watch a lot of UFC. I watch a lot of English Premier League soccer. I'm not going to talk about NFL football in this podcast a whole lot. I do enjoy watching a football game. My team is the Pittsburgh Steelers, but I'm just not as into the NFL this year, and I will get into those reasons in future episodes of this podcast. And I'll give myself a little practice with the MMA stuff. UFC 219 is coming up this weekend, December 30th, Saturday night. Holly Holm is actually facing Chris Cyborg. Chris Cyborg is a complete savage, undefeated women's featherweight. She hasn't been beaten in probably the last 10 years, or in fact even at all. And of course she is facing Holly Holmes, who is the upset queen. She's the woman who knocked out Ronda Rousey, upsetted her, and basically forced Ronda Rousey to crawl down into a rabbit hole and almost think about retiring. Also on that card is Khabib Nurmagomedov is facing Edson Barbosa. That is a fight I'm excited for, because whoever comes out of that victorious is going to more than likely face the winner of Tony Ferguson and Conor McGregor. I'm excited for those fights. I'm also excited for the Carlos Condit Neil Magny fight. Carlos Condit has actually been on a 7-month hiatus. He hasn't been in the octagon for a while, so I'm excited to see him get back in there. And yeah, that was my little practice run with a little sports announcing or sports news. But getting back to the reasons why I wanted to start this, I had a few of these reasons. I had this idea in my head for a good year. I started watching the election. I paid really close attention to the Donald Trump-Hillary Clinton campaign after they both became the primary nominees. And I was watching the first debate, and it was like a sideshow. It was very comical to watch. And I always wanted to tune in every time there was a debate just to get a good laugh. But I got to the third debate, and I felt exhausted. I felt like the election was going to go nowhere. I, too, thought Hillary Clinton was going to win, even though I was hoping for Donald Trump just to get a bit of a change in there. I really didn't start paying attention to politics probably until 2012. Before that, I just could give a shit. I cared about a few things and a few things only. I started really paying close attention to it when my oldest son was a year old, and started researching and looking into politics more as it became more important to me as an adult. But I got tired of just the fake news that goes around. And I know, I'm quoting Donald Trump, the pioneer of the fake news. But I couldn't figure out what media outlet to trust. I watched a lot of Fox News, but on Fox News, Donald Trump can do no wrong. I watched a little CNN just to try to get both sides, and when it came to CNN, Trump did everything wrong. And it just became exhausting to watch it. I didn't trust any of these media outlets. I started watching a lot of European news channels just to get a little bit of world news. But also in this last year, I started listening to a lot of podcasts. I saw the app on my phone. I have an iPhone. And I was like, hey, you know what? Let's check this out and see what's on there. So I go on there, and I noticed that Joe Rogan, UFC announcer, stand-up comedian, one of my favorite comedians, he had his own podcast on there, and I started to listen to his podcast. The first episode I listened to was the episode with Jordan Peterson. Now, if you guys don't know Jordan Peterson, he's the University of Toronto, Canada psychology professor who was banned from school, who was put on a leave because he refused to use gender-neutral pronouns. He took up a big issue with that and took a big stance against it because in Canada they were passing legislation to actually make using those gender-neutral pronouns legally. You had to use it. And Jordan Peterson's point was that you can't control people's speech, and once you send speech into law, you are trying to control people. And that's what they did during the Soviet Union eras. And I really was intrigued by that story. I didn't even hear about that story until I listened to Joe Rogan and he was on there. So that got me intrigued about listening to more podcasts. They just talked about a lot of things that weren't being talked about in the news. I mean, they were making jokes about the election. They were making comments about, political issues and all that, and you'd get a good laugh. But they'd also start talking about serious subjects too, like technology. And Joe Rogan has a good mixture of guests on there, and I really enjoy it. I enjoy a lot of other podcasts too. I listen to a podcast by a guy named Dan Carlin. It's called Hardcore History. It's a little long. If you have time in your day to sit down and listen to a 5-hour podcast, I highly recommend it. He talks about everything, breaks different eras of history down into a point where the common man like myself could understand it, and I really did enjoy it. But moving on to my next reason to start this podcast was let's talk, people. Really, I feel like it is my generation's responsibility. I just turned 30 last month. I feel like it's almost our responsibility to bring back face-to-face conversation, get people talking again, whether you guys agree or disagree on political matters or a sports call or any type of disagreement you have. Let's talk about it, because that's the most important thing that you could do. I'm not going to sit behind my phone or the computer and debate people on Facebook or Instagram or anything like that. It's just not my cup of tea. So I promise my viewers/listeners that I will never do that. I will talk about stuff on here. If you want to come on the podcast and have a conversation with me, you are more than welcome. But yeah, it's very important to me that people get back into general conversation. I feel like everybody's relying too much on communicating over text messages. People are just forgetting about proper grammar, the LMFAOs, the FYI type of stuff. There's no punctuation, no proper grammar, and I feel like it almost drives me nuts sometimes. But I digress. Sorry, I went off on a tangent. I might start doing that. I apologize in advance. Every once in a while, I might start pissing out of my ass. But we'll move on to the next, and actually the finally most important reason why I wanted to start this podcast is because I love to soak up all the oxygen in the room. And I don't mean that in a negative way. I just really enjoy talking to interesting people. I feel like it's a humbling experience to talk to people that know more on a subject matter than you do, and it feels good to be educated on subject matter. I'm having a hard time tonight. It has been a long day. I was feeling a little under the weather earlier today, but I got a little sushi and coffee in me, so I'm feeling a little bit better. So bear with me. Let's move on to the next one. I enjoy conversations so much that I'm going to do my best to get them to you guys, my audience. I'm going to make it a point to talk also to maybe some family members as well. Get some of my nutty family members on here. I think you guys would enjoy that. I actually inherited the Irish gift of the gab from my wild family members. I definitely inherited my talking from my mother's side of the family. If you ever met any of my mother's side of the family, uncles, cousins, or whatever, we love to talk. We love to talk about anything. We get a good few laughs in. Sometimes we talk over each other at the dinner table, but it's typical, and that's exactly why I love it. Now, I really wanted to go into talking about this podcast studio kit that I got. It's a podcast studio starter kit. It's from Behringer Technologies. It's a German company. And I want to tell a little bit of an embarrassing story about how I could not get this thing to set up to save my life. The other night, I sat here at this kitchen table with this thing plugged into the computer, and I could not get the microphone to record on GarageBand. And it was driving me insane. I Googled all these different solutions. I looked through the manuals. I could not find the solution to my problem. So I'm sitting here thinking, okay, shit, this thing isn't going to be compatible with a Mac, so I'm going to have to send this back, and it's going to push back me recording my podcast even longer. But silly me, I actually found a little chat going on in the Reddit site, and I found some guys that steered me in the right direction, and it was such a simple solution. I actually had to turn the stereo from stereo to monophonic meaning that the sound is coming from a single channel, whereas like a stereo, it's coming from multiple channels. If I was trying to produce my voice onto a loudspeaker, I would have to put it onto stereo. And I also had my input-output wires crossed. I thought I had them in right, but silly me, I did not. And it took me 2 hours to solve that problem, but I solved that problem nonetheless. It was a little help from the guys on Reddit, but hey, I persevered, I got through it, and here I am talking to you right now. I'm rambling a little bit, but I do sincerely ask, just be patient with me. It is my first podcast. I hope I can bring you guys back and we can get a few laughs out of you. Last and certainly not least, I do want to give a couple thank yous out. I have to give a thank you to my wife, Sarah, who signed the permission slip for me to do this podcast. She's heard me talk about this for quite some time now, and she was just like, why don't you just do it? You keep talking about this, just do it. And I'm like, you know what? I'm going to do it. And that's what pushed me over the edge. She motivates me and brings the best out in me, and I love her for that. I also love her sincerely for the logo that she created for this podcast. If you follow my page on Instagram, you have already seen it. It was the first picture that I did put up, and everybody really liked it. I got a lot of good compliments on it, and I hope that intrigues you guys to come and join this podcast and subscribe to it when I do get it out onto iTunes. It's going to take me a couple weeks to get it onto iTunes. I've been reading some things about the process of getting your host and RSS feed onto iTunes and getting Apple to actually validate it. So what I'm going to do, actually, after I do record this, I'm going to post this episode up onto YouTube for you guys to listen to. And I hope you guys enjoy it. If you want to wait patiently, you can. You can wait for it to come out in a couple weeks on iTunes. But if you just can't wait to hear my sweet, sexy voice, you guys could just go onto YouTube and listen to it right away. So, yeah, and I also love how honest my wife is with me. She's probably laying in our bed right now watching her Grey's Anatomy and hitting the pause button just to hear me out here rambling into this microphone, and I'm sure she's getting a good few laughs out of it. I also want to I got to thank my in-laws, actually, because I didn't have to drop a single dime on the hardware kit. They got me this Behringer podcast studio kit for Christmas, and it was completely unexpected. So Ed and Kim, I really appreciate you guys getting me started on this. And last but certainly not least, I really want to thank my mom and dad, because without them, you guys would not be hearing my sweet and sexy sounding voice on this podcast. And they also got me this second microphone too, so I can have some guests on my podcast. So I'm going to have a little fun with this podcast. I really hope you guys tune into it as I get going. I'm going to have some guests on. I have a few guests lined up in the coming weeks. I'm going to make it a point and a goal to actually post at least an episode per week. I might not be perfect at that. That's no guarantee. If you're a parent, you can completely understand how hard it is to try to do something like this with kids running around your house screaming and yelling. Luckily, I could record this tonight because my youngest son, he is sleeping already, and my oldest son is with his nanny and pop tonight, and I was able to do this. So I'm going to actually have some fun and do a little segment on this podcast. I'm going to make it a goal to keep this segment going, and I'm not sure if anybody does this. I've never heard any podcast where anybody does this. I listen to a few talk radio stations, and I don't hear too many people do this, but I'm going to make it a point to do this day in history. I want to do, each time I record a podcast, I'm going to talk about the day that I'm recording it, December 27th. That is today. By the way, Merry Christmas and Happy New Year, everybody. I hope everyone had a phenomenal holiday. Christmas is the holiday season, Christmas, Thanksgiving. It's one of my favorite times of the year, especially with having kids. But yeah, here we go. Into this day in history, December 27th. The American troops on this day in 1780, American General Daniel Morgan detaches a force of approximately 275 troops commanded by Colonel William Washington. He's actually George's cousin. I had to do a little digging and research on that one. He commanded troops to destroy a force of 250 British loyalists taking refuge at Hammond's blacksmith shop and trading post located near Fairforest Creek, South Carolina. Also, on this day of history, Radio City Music Hall did open its doors. The brainchild of billionaire John D. Rockefeller, Radio City was opened in 1932. The hall was built on a plot of land that was actually intended for a Metropolitan Opera House. However, the Opera House had to cancel its plans in 1929 due to the start of the Great Depression. And it is also the home of one of my favorite acts to go see up in New York is the Radio City Rockettes. Their first show was actually 1933, which I thought was very interesting. I did not know that the Rockette organization was around that long. But if you could ever get up to New York, to the Radio City Music Hall, by all means, please go to the Christmas Spectacular show. It's a real treat. It's breathtaking. Moving on. Also on this day in history, in 1941, Office of the Price Administration begins to ration automobile tires. The Federal Office of Price Administration initiates its first rationing program, in support of the American war effort in Nazi Germany. It mandates that from that day on, no driver will be permitted to own more than 5 automobile tires. Man, what a crazy time. I think we live in crazy times now, but that's why I enjoy history so much, because you get to read little fun facts like that and realize that there was also some strange times back then too. Moving on from that, on this day in history in 1979, Soviets took over Afghanistan. In an attempt to stabilize the turbulent political situation in Afghanistan, the Soviet Union sends 75,000 troops to enforce the installation of Barack Karmel as the new leader of the nation. The new government and the imposing Soviet presence, however, had little success in putting down anti-government rebels. Thus began nearly 10 years of an agonizing, destructive, and ultimately fruitless Soviet military intervention in Afghanistan. And finally, I'm going to do a little sports history here. On this day in 2004, Peyton Manning breaks the single-season touchdown record. He was playing the San Diego Chargers, and he threw a pass to wide receiver Brandon Stokely in the end zone for his 49th touchdown pass of the season, breaking this previous NFL record held by Dan Marino. That record, if I remember correctly, was short-lived because a year later, Mr. Tom Brady threw 51 touchdowns, so that little record by Peyton Manning was short-lived. So that was my pilot episode of the podcast. I really hope you guys enjoyed it. I'm sorry for rambling on and kind of stuttering through some things. It's been a long day and it's getting pretty late, and I'm actually getting into past my bedtime right now. So I hope you guys enjoyed it. Love you guys. See ya. Oh boy, oh boy, oh boy, is it humbling to hear yourself talk. Note to self, Brian, put some distance between you and the microphone so people can understand what you are saying. I really hope I didn't turn you guys off with that. I do apologize. I was very tired recording that episode, but I had to get it out there for you guys. To entertain you a little more, I'm going to leave you with my intro music. I put this little thing together. It got me going. It's excited. It's a little bit of old school hip hop. So I hope you guys enjoy it. See you next time. Get